Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Amanda Sutliff. I am from GuardSquare. We're the leader in mobile application protection and security. Today, we're going to be talking about stopping piracy at the source, especially when it comes to streaming apps. So let me first start with a scenario for you. An attacker downloads your streaming app, just like any customer would. They don't need stolen credentials, they don't need to breach your backend, and they don't need to crack your DRM. They just need your app. And within a relatively short amount of time, they can start to understand how the app works, how playback is initiated, how tokens are requested, how APIs are called, where trust decisions are made. And then from there, they can extract things like entitlement logic, they can automate access, modify the app, or repackage it entirely. And then suddenly your premium content is being streamed outside of your control. Not because your DRM failed, not because your backend was breached, but because your mobile app became the weakest link. So that's the shift that we're seeing across the streaming industry today. For years, the industry has done a really good job of protecting the stream itself, but piracy has evolved. Today's attackers are targeting the client, right? The client being the mobile application. And that's the core idea that I want to leave you with today. You can't protect content if you can't trust the client. So very quickly, here's how I'm hoping to spend the next 20 minutes or so with you. So first, I'm going to walk through how piracy actually happens today, because in a lot of cases, it looks very different than teams expect it to. Then we're going to talk about why DRM alone, while it's still essential, is not solving the whole problem. And then we're also going to cover why streaming apps have become such valuable targets. Not just because of the content that they deliver, but because of the business logic that they contain within them. And then finally, we're going to share with you what we've seen work in practice, how layered mobile application protection can help streaming providers reduce risk without hurting the viewer's experience. So let's start with what an attack path actually looks like. When most people think about piracy, they still think about someone intersecting the stream. But more and more, that's not where we're seeing the attacks start. It's starting much earlier in this process, right? They're downloading the app from the mobile app from the App Store, because that's easy. It's publicly available. Then they reverse engineer it. And this is really important. If your app isn't properly protected, reverse engineering today is far more accessible than a lot of teams think that they are. Attackers can use readily available tools to inspect the app code, understand how playback logic works, identify trust checks, and map out the API interactions. Once they understand how the app works, then they're going to move to exploitation, right? So that can include extracting CDN tokens, replaying authentication flows, or cloning the app itself. And at that point, they're going to automate unauthorized access, enable large-scale account abuse, or redistribute premium content, which we see happen a lot. And by the time most teams detect this, the damage is already done. The content's out there, right? This attack path that we're seeing is happening faster, cheaper, and more scalable than a lot of teams can keep up with. And this is where a lot of traditional security strategies are running into a blind spot, because most defenses were designed to protect the stream, not the client that's requesting it. So let's talk quickly about DRM. So to be clear, DRM is critical here, okay? It plays an essential role still in protecting premium content in transit, right? So it's securing the stream, it's enforcing playback rights, it's helping providers meet licensing obligations. This isn't about replacing DRM. It's about recognizing where its visibility and control stop, Because DRM was designed to protect content delivery, it was not designed to secure the mobile app itself, the environment where the playback is being initiated, where tokens are requested, and then content access is enforced. And this distinction matters because the mobile app runs in an environment that you don't control. It's on consumer devices. It's on rooted or jailbroken phones, devices running debugging tools, environments where attackers can observe and manipulate the app behavior. So even if the stream itself is encrypted, if an attacker can reverse engineer the app easily, understand how those trust decisions are made, bypass client-side checks, or extract tokens before content's ever requested, they can still get around the protections that you've invested in. And that's the blind spot. DRM protects the content once it's in motion, but it assumes the client requesting it is behaving as expected, that the app itself is experiencing expected behavior, right? And today, we're finding that that assumption is costing companies a lot of money. Because again, you can't protect content if you don't trust the client. And that's what makes streaming apps such valuable targets for attackers. The app is no longer just a viewing interface. In a lot of cases, it contains the logic that governs access to your content, your subscribers, and your platform. So this is the gap that we see across the industry. Most investment is here at the back end, right? It's the back end, it's the APIs, and it's the DRM. But attackers are increasingly operating here at the mobile app. It's running in an uncontrolled environment, user devices, rooted in jailbroken systems, instrumentation tools. The app becomes the weakest link in your security chain. So to make this a little more concrete, let me share an example from a large pay TV operator we work with. This is a major digital video entertainment provider in Latin America. They have more than 10 million users. They're operating across 11 different countries, and they're growing subscriptions rapidly. And like many streaming subscription providers, they had already made some serious investments in protecting their platform. They had DRM in place, they had encrypted content delivery, and they had strong backend control. From a traditional content protection perspective, they were doing all the right things. But as their streaming business grew, so did the value of what attackers could gain by targeting their mobile app. And what they started to recognize was that something uncomfortable was starting to transpire. Despite those investments, it was still too easy for an attacker to manipulate how their app worked. And here's what they found. Because the mobile app wasn't sufficiently hardened, attackers were able to reverse engineer key aspects of the app. So that meant they could begin to understand how playback was initiated, how entitlement checks were handled, how tokens were requested and refreshed, and how the app communicated with backend services. Once that logic became visible, the risks multiplied exponentially. Those attackers were manipulating and bypassing client-side checks. They were modifying the app to remove restrictions. They were cloning the experience and then automating unauthorized access. And this created multiple problems for the business. Beyond piracy, they were also facing increased API abuse on the back end, infrastructure strain from automated requests. They were experiencing greater operational complexity here, and then the risk to customer trust. They had 10 million plus subscribers who they were starting to lose because of the app being manipulated. Once the attackers understood that client, they often are gaining insight into far more than just playback, right? This is the part that so many teams are underestimating. The app compromise doesn't just create content leakage, it creates a broader platform risk. And for a fast-growing streaming provider, this risk is exposing revenue, customer experience issues, brand trust, and scalability. So the challenge became clear. How do you continue delivering a seamless streaming experience without creating an easy path for attackers to exploit the app? And that's where the shift from traditional content protection to application protection becomes so important. At a high level, most successful attacks against streaming apps follow a pretty consistent pattern here. So it usually comes down to 3 steps. First, attackers are working to understand your app, which means initial step is reverse engineering your app. Your code, your playback, workflows, your entitlement logic, and your API interactions. If they can't see how the app works, they can begin to identify where trust decisions are being made. The second piece in this attack chain here is about modifying your app. This could mean bypassing client-side restrictions, altering playback behavior, or creating cloned versions of your app. And then once that cloned version is out there, up on the App Store, anyone can download it. So at this point, they're no longer using your application the way you intended. They're using a manipulated version of your app and manipulating the business logic to their advantage. The third piece in this scenario here is that they're exploiting the backend. So they're replaying tokens, automating requests, abusing APIs, or enabling unauthorized access to premium content. So if you think about it simply, they understand, they modify, and then they exploit. And the important point here is, if you allow step 1, the rest becomes dramatically easier. This is why we're seeing an important shift across the industry. For years, the primary focus has been, how do we protect the content itself? And that made sense. But today, the problem is evolving. Because attackers increasingly aren't attacking the stream, they're attacking the client that requests it. So the mindset from a security perspective has to shift. This is no longer just a content protection challenge. It's an application protection challenge. Because the mobile app now sits at the center of user experience, entitlement, trust, and access to content. And that brings us back to the core idea here, is that you can't protect content if you don't trust the client. The goal now isn't just protect what's being delivered, it's to make sure the app requesting that content can be trusted. So first, we suggest an approach for a modern defense strategy. Make the app in the first place difficult to understand, because if your attackers can easily reverse engineer your code, then they can quickly map to those trust flows, those entitlement checks. So the goal here is simple: raise the cost and complexity of analysis. The second piece here is about making the app hard to modify. Attackers rely on being able to tamper with the app, bypass the checks, and alter the behavior. So if you need protections that help preserve the integrity of the app in hostile environments. The third point here is about detecting and responding to threats. Assume attacks will happen. Be ready to detect and respond, because this is not static. Threats evolve. Attackers are changing tactics all the time. So your security strategy needs to be adaptive. It needs to be visible and continuously improving. When you combine those 3 things, making the app harder to understand, harder to modify, easier to monitor, you start to break that attacker workflow we talked about. And that's what modern streaming app protection really needs to do. So this is where GuardSquare can come into play. At the code level, we make your app extremely difficult to understand through advanced protection and obfuscation techniques. At runtime, We detect tampering, instrumentation, and suspicious environments. Once your app is released, we give you the visibility into real-world attacks so you can continuously improve. This isn't one layer, it's a system. Going back to our pay TV provider, in this case, after implementation, professional pen testers were unable to break the app. More importantly, the attack paths were disrupted, API abuse was reduced, and this was achieved without impacting the viewer's experience. In this case, security did not slow the business down, it enabled it. If there's one thing to take away today, it's this. Piracy today starts long before content reaches the stream. It starts in the mobile app. And the companies that will win here are the ones that stop treating the app like a delivery layer and start protecting it like it's a business-critical asset. You can't protect content if you don't trust the client. Thanks, everybody.